Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm excited to introduce some very, very special guests here today. Again, we're on our new platform with the Tricentis as part of our partnership, and I have some very special guests that I'd like to introduce. Starting with our customer, Corinne Goril. Corinne is the change leader for overall changes at Barrick, and we're going to give her a chance to introduce herself in a little bit, and we'll get to hear a case study of how this is Tosca is working for her as part of an overall change process. So we're working very closely with Barrick overall on some changes. We also have Bill Hayden from Tricentis. Welcome, Bill. And on the Core ALM team, we have Virgus George, who's going to walk us through a demonstration of how Tosca works live in action. So please take the chance to put your questions in the chat. You can use the chat function on the questions chat on the platform to enter questions, and we'll get to those a little bit later. But to start things off, I'm just going to share some slides and we can walk through our presentation for today. Okay, to get started, let's talk about Tricentis. Who is Tricentis and what is Tosca? And for that, I'm going to ask Bill to step in and give us the good news.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that introduction. As you said, my name is Bill Hayden. I'm a senior alliances architect here at Tricentis. Tricentis was formed in 2007-2008 timeframe by our founder Wolfgang Plotz because he realized that the simple pace of change of the applications that we're supporting, including SAP, was simply getting to the point where traditional testing paradigms were breaking down. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about his ideas around how to tackle that. In the last webinar we did, we talked about his first idea, which is, what if we could actually do less testing, but do it more intelligently? In this webinar, we're going to be tackling a second idea, and that is all around test automation. And we're going to go into depth about why traditional techniques have not lived up to their promises and why what Wolfgang envisioned was different. We call it model-based test automation, a truly codeless approach to solving this problem. As you can see, we have grown by leaps and bounds over the years. Not only does SAP use us internally for all their testing, we are now the market leader in this space because of the efficiency factors that we bring to the table. Things such as taking a project and allowing them to complete their SAP upgrade 7 months ahead of schedule and with a savings of $4 million. Real tangible results from using the expertise of people like Core ALM along with our technologies. I mentioned that not only does SAP use us internally, we're actually embedded in everything they do. We're one of their 10 primary Solex partners, which means they actually resell our technologies. We're embedded in their methodology. We're embedded in their testing processes. And even some of our generative AI technologies are embedded in their tooling, such as Core ALM. But this decision was made about 2017, 2018. I believe it was always Wolfgang's dream to partner with SAP in this regard. And it was the combination of those ideas that I mentioned, along with some of his other ideas, which he wrote about in his book, Enterprise Continuous Testing, highly recommended, that led SAP to pivot to us to be their primary go-to and really only partner in the testing space. Being able to do that, less testing more intelligently, combined with a sustainable way to do test automation that results in very high levels of not only functional coverage, but as Wolfgang liked to say, risk coverage, because risk is our currency. Now, today, let's talk about that second idea, test automation in a way that's sustainable and maintainable. Now, what is wrong with traditional approaches? I've actually been in the business for 25 years and worked with a lot of the competitive tool sets in that time. I started my testing in the build up to Y2K for anyone who's old enough to remember those days. And every single tool we used back in the day, and even till today, in a lot of cases, is based on scripting or coding. We literally needed to learn a language and build a secondary code base to test a primary code base. But what was the problem with that? Once we had a significant level of coverage, we were spending more time fixing our automation than running it. We were spending more time fixing the test harness than actually fixing bugs in the application. In fact, it was so bad that in 2004, a gentleman named Charlie Lee, a friend of mine, I went to college with him, He wrote a book on this for HP at the time and said, your break-even point for where you're going to spend less time fixing than running is 40% coverage. That was 20 years ago. And again, this is due to the pace of change that we're dealing with in our environments. Now think about everything that's happened in the last 20 years. The Agile revolution, the DevOps revolution, headlong charge to the cloud, everything generative AI is now bringing to the table. Today is as slow as it's ever going to be again. And therefore, those rates, that ideal break-even point for script or code-based automation, that's dropped to 20%. So what's happening to the other 80%? Well, it's either not being tested or they're trying to do it manually. It's no way you can keep up. And that's why people always look at testing departments and see them as the bottleneck to speed and agility. Well, this is where Tricentis comes in. If you look at our differentiation capabilities, first and foremost, let me talk about model-based test automation, because that really is the big differentiator. What is a model? A model is simply a visual representation of a screen or an API call or a SQL call, because we actually test at all three levels: UI-based testing, API-based testing, or even data testing. And with those visual representations, we can build a library of all the screens in SAP or whatever application we're testing, and simply drag and drop them in the right order, pair that up with the data that is needed, and we've created our test. It's very readable. It's very easy to maintain. If anything changes on one of those screens, we can either simply do a rescan, or as that first bullet teases, we actually have machine learning embedded in the system that can catch changes on the screen on the fly and auto-update the test on the fly using neural networks. Hopefully in a later webinar, I'll tell you about how we're leveraging generative AI to help tackle the initial test creation challenges as well. And I think you're going to see that in early 2025. And it not only works this way for SAP, we can test across hundreds of different interfaces. There's literally not an interface that we can't at least in part automate. So when you're talking about true end-to-end testing across all those integration points, because when I used to write SOWs for some of the professional services organizations I used to run, it was really those integration points that determined how much effort was involved. Now I have one tool and one platform that can test across all of that. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, if you were to go to Olive Garden today on an app and order spaghetti for curbside to go, you've touched 27 different systems. So Tosca is the ideal product, not just for testing SAP, because that's one of those systems, but for testing across that entire application landscape. And because of the ease of maintenance, you can now keep up with the pace of change. So your release cycles are accelerated. We have documented cases to prove this by as much as 80%. You're able to maintain a high level, not just of functional coverage, but as Wolfgang said, risk coverage, because risk is our currency. Combine that with some of the principles we talked about in the first webinar, doing less testing more intelligently, now you can keep up with that pace of change. And it's a combination of those two ideas that really drove SAP to adopt us a few years ago. Just looking at some of the other capabilities of Tosca, we talked about continuous end-to-end testing. Now, remember, we can also do that at the API level and the data level. We actually, through one of our additional capabilities, have a full data integrity testing engine built into the system. We also handle test data very intelligently. We have an entire test data management service that some of our customers leverage to literally run thousands of tests each week in a continuous manner. We have the ability to integrate with Live Compare, as well as our own risk-based testing module that's built into the system. It will even optimize in different types of data combinations that you need to run through the system. Now, one traditional problem with doing end-to-end testing, if you think about our Olive Garden example, is that sometimes not all of those 27 systems have a QA sandbox, or if it's an API, maybe they're not even ready yet. In those cases, we have the ability to virtualize authentic responses coming back from those systems, and that's part of the overall Tosca suite. So you don't have any bottlenecks in truly simulating your end-to-end testing or those integration points at all three levels: GUI, API, data, and across any type of interface you can imagine. And the end results speak for themselves. I mentioned one example where a power company was able to deploy 7 months in advance and save $4 million, and they're maintaining 80 to 90% automation rates that they can realistically measure. So if you think about what Tricentis brings to the table, we simply de-risk the high rate of change that we all see in these environments today. And after you go through your S/4HANA migration, believe me, that pace of change is going to pick up like you've never seen. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steve and the team to talk about more specific examples.
That's awesome. And you said today is as slow as it's ever going to be, and that's a sobering thought. Especially the way my day has already gone so far, it's a little scary to think that things are only going to get faster. But that's why we have these tools. That's why we have great customers who are embracing this type of change. And we're going to talk to Corinne about how in Barrick we're able to keep up with that crazy pace of change. Before we get there, I just want to introduce who is CoreALM in case you're new to us. We've been a partner of Tricentis for some time. We've been in this business for almost 15 years. And when I say this business, for us, the intersection that we focus on is application lifecycle management for SAP customers. So the origin of the company is when really started when our CEO and founder, Labanat Bertucci, left his position at SAP. So he was working at SAP at the time as the application lifecycle management lead. And there he was responsible for all things application lifecycle management. He had a lot of customers that had needs, and there was no service provider that could really cover those needs. It really focused specifically on ALM for SAP customers. And so decided to found CoreALM to do exactly that. Since that time, we've served a lot of different customers. And it was about 2018 when he realized there was opportunities to actually kind of tighten up the integration between ALM tools that customers were generally using. So most people that run SAP, it's a very central component of their application landscape, but of course they have many other applications that they manage as well. Sometimes hundreds of systems, as Bill mentioned, just some examples on that. And for those other applications, they tend to use other tools such as Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, very common tools to be used in ALM processes. What we found is that creates some sort of tension and doesn't really get the best of all worlds. So we've been working with SAP tools like SAP Solution Manager, as well as now SAP Cloud ALM, and integrating those tools with Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow to create an end-to-end continuous application lifecycle management process. And we're going to talk through what are some of the benefits you can achieve with that. Of course, Tricentis plays a role in those integrations as well when it comes to automated testing, so we'll talk through some of that. We've served some of SAP's largest customers. Many of these people are running our tools, using our services, and are continuing to have an ongoing partnership with us. We cover all aspects of the application lifecycle management process. It starts from planning, but that could be keeping track of all of your requirements management, your business process hierarchy, your business process flows. Then it gets to building, where you do probably sprint planning and all of those activities, making sure that all of the things that you have as requirements are getting scheduled and executed and built properly. Testing would involve, of course, manual testing, as well as test automation and change impact analysis as well to help to optimize the tests that you're running. And we're going to talk about this process. And then release management. The one thing that's unique about SAP is when it's time to actually promote your changes, you have to deal with transports inside of the SAP platform. But of course, you don't want to move transports from QA to production until everything is working properly. So we cover services related to that as well, using tools like Charm or Cloud ALM. And then last but not least, monitoring. So making sure that your applications are staying up and stable and reporting incidents correctly and managing those incidents. So it's a very holistic process that we're going to discuss a little bit. Before we get to that, a little bit about the SAP delivery platform from an ALM perspective. If you look at tools like SAP Solution Manager, which includes Focus Build for managing projects more, you could say Charm for managing changes or transports, Focused Insights and all the monitoring capabilities in Focused Insights and Focused Run. Also Cloud ALM for implementations and operations. Those tools are good, but they do have advantages over some of the other ALM tools that you will see out there like Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, because they are tied into SAP. So you can do direct management of transports, you can do test automation, you can do things that those tools just simply do not do. But most companies do use Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow to manage various aspects of their process, and they would like to be able to bring those tools together, because without bringing those together, you have people using different systems. That leads to data inconsistencies or duplication of effort and a lack of overall automation. So what we have done is we've built some connectors that allow you to connect Cloud ALM with Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, and other tools. Same for Solution Manager. And then we have direct connections to SAP as well. So we can certainly cover those in other webinars. We have quite a comprehensive product catalog that covers Solution Manager, Cloud ALM, and direct transport management that we would be happy to discuss with you further. But let's jump in to look at what does a real holistic change process look like. And today's focus, of course, is Tricentis Tosca, but we're going to look at the process for end-to-end, from end-to-end, and see how Tosca fits in with that kind of test automation process. And we're going to use Barrick as an example because they've really embraced this end-to-end process. And I can't wait to allow Corinne to sort of walk you through what her vision is, because she's been quite a visionary in leading the change within her organization, as well as championing the continuous improvement of the change process at Barrick. So if you're not familiar with Barrick, Barrick is a leading portfolio of tier 1 gold and copper assets, which is unmatched within the industry. So very large organization, complex company that operates on 4 continents and 18 countries, and they're in some challenging places to work, and their team is spread out all over the place. So actually Corinne is joining us from the West Coast, but many of her team are in South Africa, all kinds of different countries, and she's somehow able to keep it all together, and that requires a lot of automation. So thanks, Corinne. We're going to get to you in a moment. I'm very excited to introduce you. I just want to walk through the end-to-end process. This is quite an eye chart for those that are watching, but basically just want to step through the process so you can understand the flow of how all of these tools need to kind of connect in order to get the best advantage for your process. So to start off with, you probably have requirements that are captured somewhere. It could be in Jira, it could be in different tools. In the case of Barrick, they were using ServiceNow, now they're using Halo to capture initial change requests, so those become requirements. They also have test plans that they've created, and those tests they want to automate. And so first step before you even get to the place where you're going to run tests, though, if you can take advantage of change impact analysis, that, as Bill said, that will really zero you in to make sure that you're testing the changes that need to be done. We actually covered this in a webinar last week, so if you didn't catch that, please do check it out on our platform. We can connect you up with the recording for that video. But it walks you through what is possible in terms of integration of the change management process. So the way that it works at Barrick right now is when somebody is creating a change, the developer will actually start making that change in SAP, which creates a transport. And within that transport, then they can have that transport attached to a change document, which lives inside of Charm. Actually, Barrick has an integration that they're using from Core ALM that integrates that Charm change document with Halo ITSM. Previously, they were on the ServiceNow platform. They've migrated now to Halo. That was a very recent migration, and we helped them do that transition. But basically, now those systems are connected. Halo basically gives you some additional capabilities to manage the workflow in a way that's friendly for the business to manage. But what you want to be able to do is to make sure that those pieces of information stay in sync, and that we're able to actually analyze the changes that are inside of SAP to spot any kinds of issues before they actually get through to production, or even before they're contemplated for a release candidate. So the first thing that we can do is we can run the live compare reporting. And so they have this as an automated process right now, where basically when you progress the change to a certain status, then based on the triggering of that status, the live compare report will be kicked off, and it will be automatically attached back to your change document inside of Charm. And it will go through the changes, it'll look at all of your code, and it'll say, these are the business functions that are most at risk. And so Corinne actually has a change manager who will go through those changes and updates and make sure that when they go to the change review board, that the testers have identified all those issues. Because the document is attached to your change document in Charm, those testers or those developers will see those areas that are at risk. And as we talked about last week, this is helping them to identify issues earlier, because in some times there's been cases where LiveCompare flagged areas of risk that hadn't been identified by the developer. And when they went and tested those issues, they found a problem, and they were able to resolve that issue before progressing that to the next stage. Of course, the next step would be to run some testing. So there's manual testing, of course, and there's ways to orchestrate manual testing. There are tools that Tricentis has, and there's other applications that you can use. We generally recommend orchestrating manual testing, which means using a system to kind of step you through the process step by step. And wherever that's possible, that'll help you in a couple of ways. Firstly, it captures the information in real time. Secondly, it makes a very rigorous process for the test steps that you can follow, where you see the action that's required and the result that's expected, which improves the consistency of the test results that you get from a manual perspective. It also helps you to prepare those test cases for test automation, because obviously when you get to test automation, you need to have a very clear process. All the data has to be called out and all the steps have to be clearly documented. And so if you orchestrate your manual testing, that'll help you clean up your test cases and get them ready for automation. Now we get to the fun part. We get to automate those test cases, and we're going to actually go through a live demonstration today of test automation and how that works in Tosca. So this is where you take the tool. We're going to be going through that today, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. And then the last step, of course, if everything goes well, now you should have the results of your testing. And when you get to the change review board, you'll have the business users who are aware of what changes were made. They'll be clear around what testing was run. They'll see which business users are most likely to be affected by those areas that were at risk, and they will be able to make an informed decision, as opposed to guesswork, as to whether or not this change should be approved and moves into production. And so we capture as many of those errors as we can. I really have to say, Barrick has been quite a poster child for embracing this process from end to end. We've discussed this at length, and they're constantly looking for ways that they can improve, led by Corinne as our champion. So with that, and I would like to turn it over to Corinne, and welcome Corinne. Corinne is the Global Application Services Director at Barrick, and we're very excited to have her here.
Hi, good morning everyone, or good day, whatever part of the world you're in. So I kind of want to just level set for a second and just give you a little background before I go into the steps that we're doing and why we chose the Tricentis tools. So initially, in March of 2022, we implemented Charm. And the reason we did that is we had developers stepping all over each other. We had dirty code in transports all the time. And it was just a constant nightmare of our banking going down a couple times a week and other processes. So when we implemented Charm, that stopped a lot of those issues. However, as the time went on, as you know, we thought Charm was the it end all. And then as time went on, we saw our governance across change management just continuing to climb and becoming very bureaucratic and cumbersome for us. So we started looking at tools to help us to really identify what was being touched within our system. Is it being tested appropriately? And so when we started looking, we found that Tosca was the leader for us, and they had all the right tools that we wanted to implement within our change management automation process. And so we started, as Steve noted earlier in the slide, into LiveCompare, which gives us the impacts of what objects are being changed in that specific transport. So we've attached it to Charm in a way where it identifies everything in that specific transport that is going to be a risk to the environment. And it also gives us that targeted testing, right? It identifies everywhere where we can target. So we're no longer under testing or even over testing or testing the wrong things. So when you get to once you're looking at those live compare reports, now we know exactly what to test. And so from that point, we started the journey of Tosca. And so with that, what we did is we started out with a POV, and we took one of our largest in our regression tests, and it's an integration end-to-end in our environment. We cut it back a little bit because it was such a large test script. So we really cut it in half, but it still covered really a lot of what we wanted to cover. And so once we did that, what we did in that environment is we did an end-to-end interview, and it took about 3.5 hours. And note that that script was cut in half, and we removed all the approval routing workflows that are normally required in our production environment, because we just wanted to get a sense of how the tool worked, right? So we did that end to end from a work order in our maintenance system all the way to cutting the check in AP to our vendor to pay the invoicing. And so through that process, we did, like I said, we did 3.5 hours of a walkthrough, cutting out all the steps that normally trip us up. And it took, and when we ran the test automatically, it was 6 to 8 minutes, So we went from the walkthrough of 3.5 hours to 6 to 8 minutes in that piece. And so with that, now we're going back and we're creating the entire test script. So this POV was 13 steps in that test script, but that test script is actually 27 steps, because it starts all the way in investment management and all the way to AP payments. And it also includes a service and a direct PO. So we're in the process of developing that. And the approach that we took overall as a company is we decided to do all of our regression test scripts. There are 12 of them in our environment that it tests different areas of supply chain, different types of POs, different scenarios when we're settling to the GL within the SAP environment. And so we decided that if we create all of the modules for every one of those regression test scripts, we're pretty far into being able to recreate all of our testing within those modules. We're estimating about 80% of the testing already being built, so that now we just need to create the rest of our functional testing using those regression test scripts, and then adding what we're missing in between. So overall, we're looking at a 50% reduction in just upgrades, and even in our daily work environment. Not only are we cutting just the testing time, but the rework, right? So there's a lot of rework when you're going from, if it passes in when you're testing in UAT and you're not simulating the change across, and then if you have a difference in your production environment, it may pass in our quality environment but fail in our production environment. And that was a big issue for us, right? So now we're identifying everything, and we're able to test everything up front. So we also have additional savings from the rework of the failure in production and having to go all the way back into our dev and start over from that process. So for us, it's a significant decrease in our time to produce all of these changes into our production environment. It's reducing costs from our vendors, and it's also freeing up the business from having to test all of these processes in our TRs, because now they're getting the test results, and they're able to review them and sign off to move all of our changes into our production environments. So for us, this is a massive change. It's a game changer for us. It allows us to really focus now on our upgrade strategies and really continuously improve our environments in a very productive and efficient way.
That's awesome, Corinne. And I know you have quite a few countries that you represent. You're launching new countries all the time. So even just the ability to kind of rerun those same scripts, because it's probably mostly the same steps with different data. Is that right?
It is, because we have, multiple, like we said, even in those countries, even in countries that we don't operate in, for tax purposes, we have legal entities. So in Barrick, we have over 400 legal entities. A lot of them are holding or tax companies. And so, and a lot of these are in scope for us from an audit perspective. So we're able to run all these test scripts. Before, we were just focusing on in scope because these are so burdensome to us. Because a normal, like INT 11 alone, which is the one we did the POV that I talked about, that takes 3 to 4 days to run on one company code, okay? Just because we have to go through every step, every approver. And so by removing all of that, we're down to 6 to 8 minutes, right? And that's only with half the script. So we're projecting maybe 15 minutes for a company code. So we can just kick off at night, at 6 p.m. on Pacific time when we normally kick off things, and let all the company codes run for our regression testing now. And it's not a challenge for us anymore. And so and now having every company code tested in all of our environments, just our production environment, excuse me, and within our quality environment before we do the changes, it really makes a difference for us. Mm-hmm. So we are planning to just build that regression test. I guess what we call it is a test module and a test plan, and schedule them to run every day. So only for their in scope, right? When we do major deployments, we will run every company code, but for just our daily change management process, we want to run just the in scope company codes on a daily basis, and that's what we plan to do. So
that's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. And that way you'll just improve your coverage, you'll find issues sooner. And so let's take a look at how this works. So I'm going to get Fergus George to share his screen in just a moment. But before I do that, let's just walk through the scenario that we're going to be running for this testing. As you heard from Corinne, many more steps can be added to a single test case. We had 26 steps or 13 steps in the one that we actually did as part of the POV. But you can make these as in-depth as you want. For today, we're just going to do a simple 3-step test case where we're going to create a purchase order in SAP using the Fiori screens. We're going to do a goods receipt, and then we're going to post an invoice against that PO. So it's actually 3 separate test cases, and that's generally the way that you do it. You actually build up each of those test cases using individual modules. Those modules are reusable, and then you can string them together to build end-to-end tests. It's possible to pass data between those test cases. We'll demonstrate how that works. And then you can look at status across the end-to-end scenario so that if there's any failures, you can track the status. So that's what we're going to demonstrate for you today, just to give you an idea of how the system works. Before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about the process inside of Tosca. And as Bill alluded to, it's very easy to sort of jump out of the gate and build test cases. What Tosca is very particularly good at, and why we're able to keep up with this pace of change that we're facing today, is that it allows you to build reusable modules first without writing any code. The way you do that is you open up a screen in your application. That could be a physical application like SAP GUI, or it could be a web-based application. Both work, Fiori or Ariba or any of those web-based applications, and you can be switching back and forth between those as well. What you do is you create a module by scanning the screen, and then Tosca will actually examine the content of that screen for you. It'll look at all of the controls, and it'll find all the places where you can insert information, data, click buttons, or do any of those types of things. And there's no coding required. It'll just capture that information. So that's the first step, is to do those creation of those modules. And that's a one-time thing because those modules can be reused for all your test cases. Once you have those modules, then you can basically just drag them and drop them into a test case to create those end-to-end test case scenarios. So you're going to link them step by step, and we'll show you how to do that. And then you can apply data sets. So if you want, you can just run it one time with one set of data, or you can create a data sheet and you can drive multiple executions of the same set of steps using different data conditions. So as Corinne mentioned, if you're testing multiple countries, you can have one set for one country and another set, and you can just stream them back to back and run them all sequentially. And then you build that into an execution list. That's step 3. And then you're going to run those tests. it'll run them in sequence, it'll capture the results in real time, and it'll pinpoint any failures so that you can quickly diagnose the issues and get on with the solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fergus, and I'm going to ask him to share his screen, and we'll walk through how we can do this work in Tosca.
Sure. Let me share the screen.
Please. Thank you. Okay, so what we see here on the left side, we'll focus on the left side first. This is the Tosca application. This is called Tosca Commander, and that's what you use to create those test cases. So in this, we have 3 folders that have the various modules that are included in this test case that we built for you. The first set is for logging in. Those are standard things that you do. And at the very end, there's a logout section. And then inside, we have 3 folders for create the purchase order, post the goods receipt, and create the supplier invoice. So let's take a look at one of the folders to see the modules they created to create a purchase order. So if we expand that one, you can see that there are a lot of steps to this process. And each one of those steps refers to a particular screen in SAP. So there's, the first one is manage a purchase order. That's the creation. Then you're going to enter some information into the new purchase order screen. You can see on the right there, it's very small, but Fergus can open that up for us. Every time you create a module, it scans the application and it will take a screenshot of that just so that you have a document of exactly what that application looked like at the time you did your last scan. Because sometimes these screens do change, so you can take a look. You can see the fields that are there and you can see the controls. In that application, in that module, if we go back to the module, you should be able to look at the controls that Tosca was able to identify within that module. So you can see there's a purchasing document type, there's a supplier, and all of these are pieces of the controls and pieces of data that can be entered when we go to create the test case. So that's basically what you do. You scan it. It doesn't take very long. It analyzes all that information. You create that reusable block one time, and then you can create your test case. So Fergus has it set up right now, so that test case is already created. It's on the right side of your screen. And so you can see the steps in the test case are the same structure. Create purchase order first, and then create the goods receipt, create the invoice. And so generally with each step in the process, there are preconditions and post-conditions, because we recommend for each test case that you're going to do a login and then a log out at the end. And because you may put these together in a different sequence, sometimes you want to exercise the process with different users to check that the security is working properly or segregation of duties. And so that helps with that process. If you expand the process section, then you can see the steps that are in the process. And it matches very closely with the modules because we actually created these modules for this test case. Of course, as you reuse those test cases, they may end up differing slightly, and you can create test cases that bring them together in a different order. That's the point. But basically, here is the test case that we've created. Now, if you expand the same step that we were looking at, which is the add general information for the purchase order, here's where we get to apply the data. So you can see that the supplier ID was entered, the purchasing group was specified, and this is just showing you one set of data, but if you want to, you can attach a data sheet, as I mentioned, and then you can have a stream of different data that you apply. So this is the same for all of those different steps. You would have all of this data. So when all of that is done, you've created your test case. Now you can go and build an execution list. So here we have the execution list, and within there, you have the same 3 steps. Those are, again, lists of a whole bunch of different steps that correspond with the test case. And what we're going to do is we're going to kick that off for you, and we're going to execute that test script. So this is an end-to-end scenario now. And so Vargas is kicking off the test script, and it'll start now. So this is actually Tosca that is controlling his screen right now. So what it's doing is it's opening up a browser, and it's logging in with user information that was entered as data for that test. So again, you can decide which users do you want to have running this test. You can create those test users in your QA system, and then you can exercise your security in that way. So what we're doing right now, the first step is to create the purchase order. So it's opened up the purchase order screen, and it's running through those steps, entering in the data that's required, filling in the mandatory fields, entering in the PO document type, currency, purchasing group. All of this is being driven by the Tosca. You can have it go as fast as your screen allows the test case to run. Of course, you have to manage the response time. Sometimes there's a particular result that you want to look for, so you may have to put in wait times and things like that, so that there's a bit of tuning that's required there. So the test case is now going to the point of adding the materials that we want for this particular purchase order. And when it's done, it's going to save that purchase order and create it. Okay, so the purchase order is created. If you note the number in the top left corner of the screen, it's 4075 are the last 4 digits of the PO. So Tosca is actually examining that page, and it's capturing that number because we want to use that PO number in the subsequent steps of the test. So this test case is now complete. So that was the first step of running the creation of the purchase order, but we've retained that data. So like I said, you can keep data between those different test cases. And so in the next step, we're going to do a goods receipt against that PO. So we need to have that number. So Tosca is going to remember. So now Tosca is logging in again. Could be a different user. I think in this case, we use the same user. And so it's just running to log that in, and then we're going to create the goods receipt. So I think you get the idea, but we do want to show you how you can reference that data. Okay, so now we're in the post goods receipt, and this is where we're going to enter in that PO number that we captured from the earlier test case. So that's 4075. So Tosca provided that information, and it found the corresponding PO. It sees the materials that were on that PO, and now we're going to do a receipt against that PO and against those materials. Okay, success. So again, you could capture this material document number if required for subsequent steps. In this case, that's pretty much the end of this test script. So this one is going to log out and exit. And we'll go to step 3, which is to post an invoice, the final step of the test. Okay. This one is just closing out. So you can see how it runs pretty quickly, and you can tune this depending on how responsive your system is. It might be a little faster or slower. That's why we say 6 to 8 minutes. Sometimes from a cold start, when it's running for the first time of the day, the application takes a little moment to get going. But once it gets going, usually things move a little bit faster. So we're logging in for the last test step, and this is to create the invoice and post that supplier invoice. So the right screen is loaded, and Tosca is running through. There are some conditional steps that you can be watching for pop-up and alerts like that. So we have that programmed into the test case. If there's an alert there, you can deal with it. So we're going to search for that. That invoice is going to be created based on that PO. And this part takes a little bit of time to run through, but we'll just continue to talk while this is going. And when it gets to the end, we'll show you the test results. This might be a good opportune time to look at some of the questions that people have put into the chat, and we can deal with those. And when this is all done, we can ask some questions. So the first question that we have is, how long does it take to get Tosca installed and up and running? And maybe, Bill, I'll throw this one over to you if you don't mind.
It's actually a very timely question, because what you've seen so far is the on-premise version of Tosca, but it does come in 2 flavors. There's also a cloud-based version of Tosca, and we're going down that model. By the way, we're going to be supporting both models going forward to address exactly this. If someone just wants to get up and running immediately without having to install any on-prem infrastructure, we now, as of a webinar we will introduce it in next week, offer that as an option. So much quicker to get up and running, much quicker to get to value. Now, if we look at traditional Tosca, now I can install it on a machine in about 30 minutes to get it up and running, but it all depends on your execution infrastructure. So if you have something where you want to have remote execution agents, which is what a lot of our customers want to do, so they can run many tests in parallel, we simply need to set up each of those machines, connect it to the server layer of Tosca, which is where you do your test data management, by the way. And then we set up the various authoring agents, which we call commanders, which is what you're seeing here. Because as I like to say, since automation is not a spectator sport, we're not sitting around watching these things running. We want our Tosca commanders to be available to continue to do any test authoring, test creation, or even the occasional maintenance while the execution agents run in the background.
Awesome. Yeah, so in our experience, really just a few days to get the thing installed, and you can get started right away. The next question kind of dovetails with that. Like, how long does it take to build an automated test case? We covered some of that in the results. Vargas, in your experience, how long does it take generally from understanding the process flow to actually going through and building out those test cases and having them execute within the platform?
Yeah. So thanks, Steve. So initially it will take, because we have to build the modules and all. Once the modules are ready, then the second phase is like when it is easy for us to create the test cases. So initial phase, it will take a little time to create the couple of test cases. Once the modules are ready, then it is reusable module. So the second part will be, it is easy. I will say the second phase, once a couple of test cases are ready, then when you go, when you continue preparing the test cases, it will be easy for us.
And we've seen
also, I just wanted to chime in on that as well. We also have some exciting announcements to address those challenges as well. We know that there is a time sink up front in order to get those modules created initially. We're going to introduce in early 2025 as one of our premier generative AI-based offerings. And that will be the ability to take a high-level description with corresponding data and automatically generate the Tosca modules and the Tosca test flows at the moment of execution. It will literally look at each screen, determine what it needs to do to meet its objective, generate the Tosca automatically, execute that Tosca to get to the next screen, and then repeat that process until the overall goal is reached. We call it autonomous testing. So look forward to that webinar, hopefully coming in early 2025.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I think in our experience, we generally budget about 3 days per test case, depending on the number of steps. So great. Next question, we have a bunch of questions pouring in, so we'll go through these. I think I'll throw this one to Corinne. Corinne, the question is around integrating of Tosca and Live Compare. I'm not going to ask you about the integration side of things, but how is it that those tools can be used together, and what are your thoughts as to what are the advantages of having both of those tools covered on the same platform?
Okay, so what our roadmap looks like, and I'll give you it, is we have that's our change management is a SOX control for us, right? So how our roadmap reads is we work from dev, we do unit testing. When we get to quality, we have to do UAT, and our business process leads have to sign off before it goes into production. So under the Live Compare piece of it, what we do when it gets to unit testing in dev environment, once that status is updated to that status inside of our challenge, it automatically kicks off that Live Compare report. And so the developer will receive that report and look at it and be able to say, okay, these are my high risk impacts, these are my medium and low, this is my test pattern, this is where I need to test. So that's how it is when you just have the Live Compare environment. But when you incorporate the Tosca piece into it, the Live Compare identifies all the testing that is required. It goes and looks at Tosca. It identifies if you have a test case for all of the objects that are being impacted, and it informs you if you don't, and you have to create that other additional test case on the fly. So you're able to run through all the tests that are available, and then you just create that additional test case, and then you have every scenario that's tested. And where are run stages? So the approach we're taking is that crawl, walk, and run. And so once we get to that run stage, how it's going to do is it kicks off in our unit testing. Live Compare puts the report. It identifies all the testing. It it runs all the testing in the developer manually tests it. Once it gets into UAT, all the automation will kick off, and the unit testing will automatically populate into our Halo environment under that change request ticket. And then that business process lead will be able to read the test results. If anything fails, he'll be able to fail the ticket back to fix that until it gets to a pass stage, and then the BPL will go ahead and produce it into our production environment. So that's our end-to-end automation. And so we're trying to minimize the business impact of having business users having to go in and test. So this is a lot of time savings to where we can really focus on value add from a business perspective, but also from a change management perspective. We have assurance from a SOX control perspective that we have all of our object impacts noted. We have targeted testing to identify everything that's been tested and passed. And then when we get sampled or when we get pulled from our auditors, our external auditors, we have all the documentation within a change request itself, so that all they have to do is pull the data from the change request for everything that occurred for that change, and we're done. So it will in the future, it will reduce our auditing costs because we're not chasing down and looking for information. It's all readily there within our ticket.
Yeah, it's great to have the fully integrated platform. Mm-hmm. Great. We have a bunch of questions. I'm going to try to whip through a few of these. The first one here, the next one I should say, is talking about some specific tools related to transport management and whether they can use Live Compare. This is from Pablo, and I'm not familiar with all of those technologies. Live Compare can run against two different sources. It can run against Charm, and it can run against actual transport. So you basically give it a list of transports. So as long as out of your tools, you can make for your features a list of the transports associated with a particular release, then you can package those up and you can create a report within Live Compare to execute the Live Compare analysis on that package. And then you'll have a complete list of impacts for that feature or release. Hopefully that clarifies the question for Pablo. The next question, when running the same test case with different data sets, how can they be run in parallel? So Bill talked earlier about the parallel execution. You can set up Tosca agents that are all going to run on different machines, and you can have separate licenses where those are running off in parallel. So it absolutely is possible to distribute that load out to those different machines, and they're going to get it done faster, basically. As long as there's no conflict on the back end, then there should be no issue doing any of that. And that's a very common scenario. The next question, in case we have a drop-down list in a document, and during automated testing, we'd like to get the value from that drop-down list so that we could select it from each time. How is this recorded in Tosca? Virgus, I think you could help us to clarify, but you can, sure. It is possible. You don't have to show or demonstrate, but just a quick answer on how we can capture values. I think you can capture values from any control, right?
Yes. So the drop down, it will automatically capture all the values from that particular drop down.
Okay, great. So it's quite a versatile system. When it does its scanning, it will analyze all of that content. You'll see those, and you can look for specific values from that drop-down list. That's part of your validation process as well. So yes, that is definitely possible. The next question, can tests be run in the background? There's no need to run them in the foreground. Absolutely. So we did it in the foreground just so you could see this, but that's not the normal process. Usually you'll be connecting with the client, you'll send the test case over to the server, it'll kind of run in a more of a lights out mode, and then you can get a report. We showed you the live report on the screen here today. In fact, we didn't even get to it yet, but you can see on the screen that we're showing on the execution side right now, there's green check marks. They're a little small, but each one of those steps has a green check mark. If there was an issue or an error, that would be a red X, and you would know that you have to go and investigate some result. All of the results are captured there. This is the live view of it, but Tosca also automatically produces different reports when you execute. And those reports can be a summary level report, which just tells you the status of the test case at the high level, or a detailed step-by-step report, which gives you all of the gory details. And then that document, as we've discussed, can be automated as part of your change management process, as Corinne was discussing, where it's added to your change information so that your auditors have access to it, your change managers have access to it, your business people have it, and it's all right there and available for you. Okay, are there any restrictions against running this with SAP Rise? So no, this can be run against any application as long as you have connectivity between the Tosca server and that application through your network. Then you can run tests against systems wherever they happen to be, cloud-based or otherwise. Can Tosca run against on-prem systems, and can they be run against running in using Tosca Cloud? So yes, you can basically Tosca, as long as you have network connectivity between Tosca and the target system, then you can test those applications wherever they are, whether you're using the on-prem version of Tosca or the Tosca Cloud. And can you save the test results as evidence? Yes, absolutely. All that data gets captured. It is also possible to capture screenshots as needed as part of that testing as well.
Yes.
The last question is, what is Barrick's experience testing against BTP applications or with CPI integrations? I don't think we've tackled that yet with Barrick, but there is a few things that, and maybe Bill, you could sort of talk what some of the features are that you can use, and we can wrap it up there.
Oh, just that we are contractually obligated to support every SAP interface and system, since SAP uses us internally for their own testing. So you will get the same experience in any of these regards that you've seen today. Quite simply, we support everything SAP does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's go ahead, Corinne.
Oh, what I was going to say is we do have Ariba in our environment, and that was part of our original POV. So the way that we have a lot of Ariba customers, so our vendors, excuse me, and how it works is you start the requisition process within SAP. It goes all the way into Ariba to source it. Once it's sourced, it comes back, or it creates the PO and it sends that PO back into SAP. And then those vendors also create, if it's a service, it will go back into Ariba to create the service entry sheet, and that will come back into our production environment. And then once all of that has been approved, then it'll go back into Ariba, and then it does create, the vendor can create the invoice, and then the invoice comes back into SAP to process. So we did that end-to-end testing of moving back and forth a lot of times, and it works really well. You have to wait a couple minutes sometimes, and you can build that lag into the test script for the information to flow back into the other system so that you can test it. But it works really well. Our supply chain teams were so excited after that test that they wanted to just put everything in there after that. So that is the biggest crutch and problem that we have, is testing between our integrated environments. So that solved the problem right there.
Thank you, Corinne. That's a great point. You can test things functionally from end to end, which implicitly tests the interface, and you can actually run interface-specific testing for BTP or CPI or any other platform that you're trying to do API-based testing with. So that brings us to the end. I'm disappointed that we can't keep talking for the rest of the day. I'm having such a great time getting all this information. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for your excellent questions. Big hearty thank you to Corinne Burrell for being a great partner of ours, for having the vision of implementing this fully automated solution, and for joining us today. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Virgus, for all of your contributions, and thank you all. So if you have more questions for us, please go to our website. In the attachments, there's a link or you can just go to corealm.com. If you click on the Talk to an Expert button in the top right corner of your screen, you can fill out the form and you can get in touch with us that way. That's how a lot of our customers make initial contact with us, and we'll be right back in touch, and we can discuss your specific scenario and how we can help. Great to meet you all. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to my presenters, and have a great rest of your day.